The New Beginning. October 15, 2021, was the day that the police responded to a call that would etch itself into their minds. Within the Oak Street apartment, they found the lifeless body of Ethan Reed, a beloved high school English teacher, his body a silent witness to a tragedy no one saw coming. But the most haunting part of the case was the person who had brought him here. His girlfriend of 2 years, Olivia Grant, a 29-year-old software engineer with a flawless career and a troubling past. Olivia had a knack for controlling the world around her, a trait she wore as confidently as her designer outfits. It started small, her need for order, her desire for approval. But over time, these became pillars of her existence. Friends and family observed her growing obsession with knowing every detail about those close to her, which many dismissed as quirks of her ambitious personality. But beneath Olivia's brilliance lay a more complex story that started long before she ever met Ethan. Born in 1992 in a Portland suburb, Olivia grew up in a family that prized achievement. Her mother, Margaret, nurtured her daughter's intellect, recognizing Olivia's need to excel. But Margaret also noticed an intensity in her daughter that other children lacked, an inability to let go of things that didn't go her way. From early childhood, Olivia struggled to maintain friendships, preferring to observe rather than engage. Friendships and family gatherings were sources of stress rather than joy. If Olivia couldn't control them, they felt like failures. Her childhood friend Carla once noted, Olivia needed to be the center of everyone's universe. And if she wasn't, she'd find ways to become it. Her need for validation escalated in high school. Olivia became known for top marks, accolades, and a relentless drive to dominate her field. Her high school boyfriend, Alex, experienced her need for control firsthand. What he initially thought was attentiveness became an endless stream of texts, surprise appearances, and questions that left him mentally exhausted. He broke up with her just before graduation, shaken but not surprised by her insistence on knowing everything about him, even after they parted ways. Olivia left Portland for Stanford, where her need for validation found a new direction in technology. She poured herself into coding, thrilled by how software allowed her to create and control. Surveillance technology fascinated her, not because of any practical application, but because it let her watch and manipulate from a distance. Her roommates grew wary of her meticulous control over the shared living space, and her sophomore roommate, Jenny, claimed Olivia once boasted about keeping an eye on another roommate's activities. Her graduation opened doors at a prestigious tech startup, and Olivia finally seemed to have found a place where her unique skills were celebrated. However, her personal life remained marked by brief, intense relationships that ended as quickly as they began. In 2019, she dated Jason, a colleague who described her as a spider wrapping her web around you until you couldn't breathe. When he broke up with her, she left a string of messages on his phone that grew increasingly desperate, and he quietly transferred departments to distance himself from her. In early 2020, Olivia moved to Ashland to take a fully remote job that gave her greater flexibility. She saw it as a fresh start. And it was there she met Ethan Reed, a gentle, popular teacher whose life was a stark contrast to her own. Born and raised in Ashland, Ethan was the kind of person who made friends effortlessly. He had a natural kindness and warmth that his students adored, his fellow teachers respected, and his friends cherished. On a spring morning at the local farmer's market, Ethan noticed Olivia at a nearby stall. She was analyzing the produce with a scrutinizing eye, and he struck up a conversation, amused by her intensity over something as simple as choosing apples. Olivia's quick wit and intelligence intrigued him, and as they talked, they discovered a shared love for literature and hiking. He invited her to a hike the following weekend, and Olivia, seeing in Ethan a kind of calm and stability she rarely encountered, eagerly agreed. Their first hike was the beginning of a relationship that seemed perfect to everyone around them. They spent hours exploring the trails, discussing books, and exchanging life stories. Ethan, who hadn't been in a serious relationship since college, felt that Olivia was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Smart, ambitious, and fiercely independent. Olivia, in turn, felt drawn to Ethan's grounded nature. He was warm and attentive, and his kind nature softened the edges of her control. In the early months, friends of Ethan noticed subtle shifts in his behavior. He was still friendly, still kind, but there was a growing hesitancy, especially around family gatherings. Olivia would text him incessantly when they weren't together, questioning him about his plans and whereabouts, often showing up at his place unannounced to surprise him. Ethan's sister, Amanda, who was wary of Olivia's intense focus on Ethan, asked her brother about it. Ethan waved her off, chalking it up to the excitement of a new relationship. "She's just really invested," he told Amanda. "Maybe a little intense, but she cares." To Ethan, Olivia's possessiveness was a strange form of devotion, a way of showing love. He had no idea that her world had already begun to close around him, that she was pulling him into an intricate, calculated pattern of dependency that left him isolated and unaware. By autumn of 2020, Olivia had taken to staying at Ethan's apartment nearly every night. She started suggesting changes in his habits, the meals he cooked, the books he read, even the friends he saw. Ethan, ever the peacemaker, made small adjustments, reassuring himself that it was simply compromise. Around the same time, Jessica Lawson, a fellow teacher and longtime friend of Ethan, noticed he had become more reserved at work. Ethan, who used to enjoy casual drinks with colleagues after work, had started declining invitations. When Jessica pressed, he admitted that Olivia wasn't comfortable with him staying out late, even with friends. Jessica's alarm bells rang, but Ethan dismissed it, saying Olivia would relax in time. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's social media presence faded. His once lively Instagram and Facebook feeds went quiet, reduced to occasional, impersonal posts. Friends noticed, but Ethan laughed it off, claiming he wanted to be more private. In truth, Olivia had subtly pushed him to limit his online interactions, citing security concerns that he didn't question. During the holiday season, tensions rose. Amanda had invited Ethan to their family Christmas gathering, but at the last minute he canceled. Olivia had insisted she wasn't feeling well, although Amanda suspected otherwise. She heard Olivia's laughter in the background during her call with Ethan, and a chill ran down her spine. Olivia's influence over Ethan seemed to grow stronger every day, but Amanda felt helpless to intervene. Olivia's control escalated in early 2021, and by spring, her presence at Ethan's apartment was a constant. She scrutinized everything, often under the guise of caring for him, but her true motive was to dominate every aspect of his life. Ethan began to look worn and tired, and his friends grew increasingly concerned. Mark, his best friend, once tried to talk to him about it. "Ethan, she's not letting you breathe," Mark said, but Ethan brushed it off. "It's just her way of showing she loves me." As Olivia's control intensified, a darkness took hold, manifesting in behaviors even more alarming. In late August 2021, when Ethan attended a weekend teaching conference, Olivia made a decision that would mark the beginning of the end. She installed hidden cameras throughout his apartment. She justified it as necessary to keep an eye on him, but deep down, her fears of losing control were driving her to extremes. The story of Olivia and Ethan was far from over, but the path they had started down was one of shadows and secrets, a slow descent into a nightmare that neither could escape. And as her web of control tightened, Ethan would soon find himself entangled in a trap from which there was no return. Shadows of surveillance. Olivia's decision to install hidden cameras in Ethan's apartment was not an impulsive act. For weeks, she had mulled over the idea, mentally justifying the need to protect their relationship, even convincing herself that Ethan would eventually appreciate her vigilance. In her mind, she wasn't invading his privacy. She was preserving their love. The setup took her an entire afternoon. She placed the cameras meticulously, hidden in unsuspecting objects. A smoke detector above the living room, a tiny lens inside a bookshelf, a phone charger by the bed, and even one disguised as a clock in the bathroom. She tested each angle, ensuring she'd have complete access to every corner of his apartment. Her expertise in software engineering enabled her to configure the cameras so she could access the live feeds and recordings on her phone, no matter where she was. By the time Ethan returned from his conference, Olivia had restored everything to its original order, leaving no trace of her intrusion. She greeted him with a warm smile, masking her anticipation to review the footage. Ethan, unaware of the invasion that had taken place, was simply happy to see her. In the days that followed, Olivia began monitoring Ethan's movements with obsessive dedication. At first, it was thrilling. Every time he entered the apartment, she watched him, noting his routines, the way he relaxed on the couch, the way he looked at his phone, his habit of singing softly in the shower. Every detail became a part of her ritual, a private world in which she controlled and observed him without his knowledge. Yet, as with all addictions, her fascination with monitoring him grew darker. She started seeing things that weren't there, interpreting his casual actions as threats to her control. If he spent too long on his phone, she suspected he was talking to someone behind her back. If he looked distracted, she assumed he was thinking of another woman. Her paranoia intensified, each perceived betrayal feeding her insecurities and escalating her need for control. Meanwhile, Ethan sensed Olivia's growing unease. She began questioning him more often, sometimes subtly and sometimes directly. When he'd come home from work, she'd ask him detailed questions about his day, wanting to know who he talked to, what he did, and why he had chosen to wear a specific shirt or tie. These questions, once harmless, began to feel invasive, and Ethan's patience started to wear thin. "Why do you need to know every little thing?" he asked one evening, after Olivia had pressed him about a lunch he'd had with a group of colleagues. Her face stiffened, but she masked it with a smile. "Oh, I just want to be a part of your day," she replied, brushing off his concerns with a laugh. But in truth, her obsession was only growing. After he fell asleep that night, she spent hours watching the footage from her hidden cameras, rewinding, zooming in, dissecting each moment with an intensity that bordered on desperation. By early September, Ethan's friends and family noticed a change in him. He had always been easygoing, a man who enjoyed the simple things in life: a good book, a conversation with friends, a walk through nature. But now he seemed anxious, distracted, as if something was constantly weighing on him. Jessica, his colleague, noticed his nervous energy and tried to talk to him. "Ethan, you don't seem yourself lately. Is everything okay?" she asked one afternoon after school. He hesitated, glancing around the empty classroom before answering. It's just been a bit overwhelming with Olivia. She's been intense lately." Jessica raised her eyebrows, choosing her words carefully. "Do you mean she's being a little too involved?" He nodded, sighing. "She just doesn't seem to trust me, Jess. I don't know why. I've given her no reason to doubt me, but it's like she's always watching." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Ethan, have you thought about setting some boundaries? You deserve a life outside of this relationship too." He gave a small, sad smile. "I know. I tried talking to her, but it only makes things worse. She gets upset, starts crying, telling me how much she loves me and can't bear to lose me." Unbeknownst to Ethan, Olivia had been listening to their conversation through her hidden cameras. That evening, after reviewing the footage, she seethed with jealousy. Jessica's words confirmed her worst fears, that there were people in Ethan's life who were trying to pull him away from her. In her mind, Jessica became an enemy, someone who didn't understand the depth of her relationship with Ethan. Consumed by the need to assert control, Olivia devised a plan to isolate Ethan further. She began encouraging him to spend less time with friends and family, insisting they needed quality time to work on their relationship. She framed it as an effort to strengthen their bond, to become closer, but Ethan sensed a strange possessiveness in her words. When he tried to push back, Olivia would launch into emotional outbursts, accusing him of not caring about their relationship. She would oscillate between tears and anger, using emotional manipulation to wear him down until he'd relent, apologizing just to keep the peace. Each time this happened, Olivia felt a sick sense of satisfaction. She had won another battle, further tightening her hold on him. During one particular argument, Olivia's frustration boiled over. They were discussing Ethan's upcoming camping trip with his friends, a tradition he had looked forward to for months. Olivia had known about the trip for weeks, but had never expressed any reservations until the night before he was supposed to leave. "I don't understand why you need to go without me," she snapped, arms crossed tightly. "Why can't I come too?" "Liv, it's just something the guys and I do every year. It's nothing personal," Ethan explained, trying to keep his voice calm. "We invited you, and you said you didn't want to go." "That was before," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Now I feel like you're choosing them over me." Ethan sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Liv, I'm not choosing anyone over you. It's just a weekend. I need this time with my friends." But Olivia's response shocked him. Her eyes filled with tears, and she glared at him as though he betrayed her. "Fine," she whispered. "Go, but don't expect me to be here when you get back." Caught off guard, Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He loved Olivia despite her intensity, and he didn't want to hurt her. Against his better judgment, he canceled the trip, choosing to stay with her. That weekend marked a turning point, a moment where he sacrificed a part of his independence to appease her. Olivia knew it, and she reveled in her victory. From that moment on, Olivia's control over Ethan grew exponentially. She would casually mention how much she needed him, how terrified she was of losing him, planting seeds of guilt and obligation in his mind. Each time he tried to assert himself, Olivia would remind him of all the ways she had sacrificed for their relationship, subtly manipulating him into compliance. As the fall deepened, Olivia's obsession began to suffocate her. Watching the surveillance footage no longer satisfied her. She needed to be present, to physically observe and monitor him. She began showing up at his school under the pretense of bringing him lunch, but in reality, she was scanning his environment, searching for any perceived threat to her control. Ethan's colleagues started to notice her frequent visits, the way her eyes darted around the room as if she were looking for something. One day, she entered his classroom unannounced, her presence startling both Ethan and his students. Olivia smiled, pretending to be warm and friendly, but her gaze lingered on every person in the room, her mind racing with paranoid thoughts. Later, one of Ethan's students, Emma, approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Reed, is everything okay with Miss Olivia?" she asked, her tone cautious. "She just seems a little intense." Ethan forced a smile, trying to reassure his student. "She's fine, Emma. She's just protective." But deep down, he was beginning to feel the strain of Olivia's control. Each day felt more stifling, her constant need for attention slowly wearing him down. By October, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity without reason, questioning every detail of his day, every person he spoke to, every decision he made. Her jealousy grew insatiable, and Ethan's life became a series of interrogations, his movements restricted, his independence eroded. One night, as Olivia scrolled through the surveillance footage, she came across a clip that ignited her darkest fears. Ethan had been talking to Jessica after work, laughing at a shared joke. Olivia paused the video, replaying the clip over and over, her face twisted with anger. In her mind, this harmless conversation became a betrayal, a sign that Ethan was slipping away. The next day, she confronted him, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "I saw you with her," she hissed. "Don't lie to me, Ethan." Confused, Ethan tried to defend himself, but Olivia's anger was unstoppable. "She's just a friend, Liv. We were just talking," he pleaded. But Olivia's mind was too far gone. Every word he spoke only fueled her paranoia, and in that moment, she realized she could never let him go. In her eyes, Ethan was no longer just her boyfriend. He was her possession, a prize she would keep at any cost. The isolation begins. The moment Olivia suspected Ethan's friendship with Jessica, her obsession took on a sinister new intensity. She became fixated on the idea that everyone in his life was an obstacle, a threat to her control. In her mind, Ethan was slipping away, and if she didn't act quickly, she would lose him to the very people who cared about him most. This belief consumed her, driving her to take measures that would deepen her influence over his life in ways she'd never dared before. The days following their argument about Jessica were filled with tension. Olivia monitored Ethan even more closely, finding small reasons to visit his workplace, texting him incessantly, and insisting he spend every free moment with her. Ethan, feeling the strain of her constant demands, began pulling away emotionally, retreating into silence instead of confronting her. This only made Olivia more suspicious, and her behavior escalated, blurring the line between love and control. In October, Olivia arranged a surprise weekend getaway for the two of them to a remote cabin in the mountains. She pitched it as a chance to relax, to reconnect away from the distractions of daily life. Ethan, exhausted by the constant pressure, reluctantly agreed, hoping the change of scenery might help them resolve their differences. The drive up was long and quiet. Olivia tried to engage him with small talk, but Ethan's responses were clipped, his mind elsewhere. He glanced out the window, watching the trees blur by, feeling a growing sense of entrapment. He missed his friends, his family, his freedom. For a brief moment, he thought about turning the car around, making an excuse to go home. But he pushed the thought away, reminding himself that he loved her, or at least he had once. The cabin was isolated, nestled deep in the forest with no cell service. Olivia's idea of reconnection turned into an experiment in control. From the moment they arrived, she monitored his every move, scrutinizing his expressions, his body language, as if searching for any hint of rebellion or discontent. She cooked their meals, chose the music, even picked out his clothes for the day, all under the guise of taking care of him. Ethan felt his patience wearing thin, but he didn't confront her, choosing instead to go along with her whims. On the second night, he sat by the fire, gazing into the flames, lost in thought. Olivia watched him from across the room, her eyes narrowed, her mind spinning with suspicions. She approached him, slipping her arms around his shoulders, but he remained stiff, unresponsive. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice soft but tense, "do you still love me?" Startled, he turned to face her, seeing the intensity in her eyes. "Of course I do," he replied, forcing a smile. But even as he said the words, he realized they no longer held the same conviction. The relationship had changed. It was suffocating him, consuming every part of his life. He felt trapped, a prisoner in his own world. Olivia sensed his hesitation, and a flicker of anger crossed her face. She pulled away, her hands clenched at her sides. "I can feel you drifting, Ethan. I know when you're hiding something." "Olivia, I'm not hiding anything," he said, exasperated. I need some space." The word space seemed to ignite something in her, and her eyes filled with tears. "Space? You want space? Are you saying you don't want to be with me anymore?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Ethan took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "No, that's not what I'm saying. I feel like I've lost touch with my own life. I need time to reconnect with my friends, my family. It's nothing against you. It's about me." But Olivia's expression hardened, and she shook her head, a bitter smile playing on her lips. "I see. You want to reconnect with your friends. With Jessica, right?" Ethan's frustration boiled over. "Jessica is just a friend, Olivia. You're blowing this out of proportion." But Olivia wasn't listening. Her mind was already racing, calculating ways to tighten her grip on him, to eliminate anyone who might take him away from her. For the rest of the trip, she became cold and distant, retreating into silence. Ethan, exhausted, gave up trying to reason with her, resigning himself to endure the weekend in tense quiet. When they returned to town, Olivia doubled down on her efforts to isolate him. She started subtly undermining his relationships, planting doubts and fears in his mind. She casually mentioned how certain friends didn't understand him, how his family criticized his choices behind his back. She even hinted that Jessica might have romantic feelings for him, manipulating his thoughts until he began to question the motives of everyone around him. At work, Jessica noticed the change immediately. Ethan, once warm and open, became guarded and withdrawn, his interactions limited to what was absolutely necessary. When she tried to approach him, he brushed her off, making excuses and keeping their conversations short. His friends, too, found him distant, his usual laughter and warmth replaced by a tense, forced politeness. He began missing family gatherings, skipping weekend hangouts, and avoiding social media altogether. Ethan's sister, Amanda, was particularly disturbed by his behavior. She invited him for coffee one afternoon, hoping to understand what was going on. When he arrived, she could see the wariness in his eyes, the tension etched into his face. "Ethan, what's happening with you?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "You've been so distant lately. We hardly see you anymore." Ethan forced a smile, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "It's just Olivia. She's going through a lot, and I'm trying to be there for her." Amanda frowned, sensing there was more to the story. "And what about you? Are you happy, Ethan? Really happy?" The question caught him off guard, and for a moment, he felt a pang of honesty tugging at him. But he quickly buried it, choosing instead to reassure her. "Yeah, I am. It's just, relationships take work, you know." Olivia's intense, but she cares. Amanda wasn't convinced. She could see the strain in his eyes, the reluctance in his voice. "Ethan, being in a relationship shouldn't mean losing yourself. You're allowed to have your own life, your own space." He nodded, but Amanda could tell he was struggling to accept her words. Olivia's influence over him had already seeped into his mind, planting seeds of doubt and confusion that clouded his judgment. When he left the cafe, Amanda felt a pang of helplessness, realizing her brother was slipping away, drawn into a world of control and manipulation. Olivia's tactics only intensified. She began questioning Ethan's every move, scrutinizing his expressions, his tone, his choice of words. At night, she reviewed the footage from her hidden cameras, dissecting each detail, searching for any sign that he was lying or hiding something. Her mind spun with paranoid thoughts, her need for control growing into an obsession that consumed her every waking moment. One evening, after a particularly tense day, Olivia confronted Ethan about his recent coffee with Amanda. She had seen the interaction through the surveillance footage, watching every expression, every gesture, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda was trying to pull him away. "Why did you meet with Amanda?" she demanded, her tone sharp. Ethan, caught off guard, hesitated. "She's my sister, Olivia. I'm allowed to spend time with my family." Olivia crossed her arms, her gaze piercing. "But what did you talk about? Did she say something about me?" "Why would she?" Ethan asked, exasperated. "This isn't about you, Olivia. I just wanted to catch up with her." But Olivia wasn't convinced. Her mind twisted his words, turning them into something sinister, a threat to her control. She pressed him further, demanding details, refusing to let him escape the conversation until he was worn down, exhausted by her relentless questioning. Each argument chipped away at his resolve, leaving him more isolated, more controlled. He stopped seeing Amanda, stopped talking to Jessica, stopped confiding in anyone. His world became smaller, narrower, defined by Olivia's needs and suspicions. He began to lose sight of who he was, his identity eroded by the constant pressure, the endless surveillance. As winter approached, Ethan felt trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. Olivia's obsession had transformed his life into a prison, his every move monitored, his every word scrutinized. He longed for freedom, for the life he once knew. But the weight of Olivia's control held him captive, leaving him helpless and alone. And Olivia, blinded by her obsession, was willing to go to any length to keep him. In her mind, their love was all that mattered, and she would do whatever it took to ensure he remained hers, no matter the cost. The breaking point. As winter settled in, the suffocating grip of Olivia's control over Ethan tightened like an iron vise. Ethan's once lively world had shrunk to the confines of his apartment, his workplace, and the ever-watchful presence of Olivia. The isolation she orchestrated was complete. Friends had drifted away, tired of his evasive behavior and hollow excuses, and his family had grown distant, unable to understand the depths of his withdrawal. Ethan felt trapped in his own life, his every thought and action dictated by Olivia's escalating demands. Olivia had crafted a narrative where Ethan was hers, exclusively. She watched him through her hidden cameras when she wasn't with him, texting him relentlessly to check in, and even showed up at his apartment unannounced. By December, her obsession had gone beyond mere possessiveness. It was as if she were merging her identity with his, attempting to erase any part of him that wasn't entirely devoted to her. The final crack came in the form of a holiday party at the high school. The faculty and staff had planned a small gathering to celebrate the end of the year, and despite Olivia's disapproval, Ethan decided he would attend. He felt he needed the chance to reconnect, if only for an evening. A glimmer of his old self resurfaced at the thought of spending time with colleagues, sharing laughs, and maybe forgetting, even briefly, the weight that had pressed on him for so long. He arrived at the party late, his nervous energy palpable. He greeted familiar faces and allowed himself to relax, rediscovering the camaraderie he had once cherished. Jessica was there, and despite the strange tension that had grown between them, she welcomed him warmly. "Ethan, I've missed you," she said, smiling, her voice genuine. "We've all missed you." He nodded, the guilt twisting inside him. "I know. I've just been dealing with a lot." Jessica studied him, her expression softening with concern. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here. Don't isolate yourself, Ethan. You're not alone." Her words resonated with him, a reminder of the life he had gradually abandoned. They spoke briefly, exchanging updates and laughter, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt a glimmer of happiness. He knew the evening would come with consequences from Olivia, but for those few hours, he savored the taste of freedom. Unbeknownst to him, Olivia had already discovered his betrayal. Earlier that evening, she had called him repeatedly, only to receive a curt text back. "At the school party. I'll be back later." The message was simple, but to Olivia, it felt like a slap in the face. She paced her apartment, her mind spiraling. How could he go without her? And why hadn't he invited her? The thought that he was alone, surrounded by people she didn't trust, drove her to a breaking point. When Ethan returned to his apartment late that night, he found Olivia waiting for him in the dark, her silhouette framed by the glow of the city lights streaming through the window. He felt a chill, sensing the storm that awaited him. He set his keys down carefully, bracing himself for the confrontation. "Did you have fun?" Her voice was low, simmering with suppressed anger. Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, I did. It was nice to see everyone." Olivia's eyes narrowed, and she took a step closer. "Did you see Jessica?" Ethan froze, his pulse quickening. He knew this wouldn't end well. "Yes, she was there," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. "We just caught up, that's all." But Olivia's face twisted, her mouth forming a hard line. "You just caught up. After everything I've done for you, you go to a party without me and chat with that woman." "Olivia, listen to yourself," Ethan said, his voice rising, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Jessica is my friend. I'm allowed to have friends." "Allowed?" she repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. "I'm the one who cares about you, who's been here for you, while everyone else just watches from a distance, and you choose to spend your time with them instead of me." Ethan felt his own anger ignite. "Olivia, you can't control every part of my life. I'm exhausted. I can't keep living like this, with you monitoring everything I do, questioning every move I make." Her face fell, her expression shifting from anger to despair. "So, that's it then. You want to leave me. Is that what this is about?" "Olivia, I need space," he said, taking a step back, his voice quieter but resolute. "I need to be my own person. This isn't healthy for either of us." But Olivia's response was swift, her voice laced with desperation. "Fine, if that's how you feel. But don't expect me to wait around while you find yourself. Ethan, I've given you everything. I've sacrificed everything for you." Her words echoed in his mind, and he felt a pang of guilt, knowing he was hurting her. But he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. "I'm sorry, Olivia, but I can't do this. Not like this." In a blind fury, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan stood there, shaken, unsure of what to do next. He felt both relief and fear, relief at finally asserting himself, and fear of what Olivia might do in response. But Olivia's departure was only temporary. In the days that followed, she made her presence known in a relentless pursuit of reconciliation. She flooded him with messages, alternating between apologies, pleas, and accusations. At first, Ethan ignored them, needing the space he had finally claimed for himself. But Olivia's messages grew darker, her words hinting at despair, at the ruin he had caused in her life. Feeling a mix of responsibility and concern, he finally agreed to meet her for coffee. Olivia arrived, her face pale, her expression a mix of sadness and bitterness. She began by apologizing, speaking of her deep love for him, her inability to imagine a life without him. But as the conversation wore on, she shifted, blaming his friends, his family, even Jessica, for poisoning their relationship. "Don't you see, Ethan?" she pleaded, reaching for his hand. "They're the ones coming between us. They don't want us to be happy. They've turned you against me." Ethan felt a chill, sensing the desperation in her voice. "Olivia, I'm not trying to hurt you, but we both need to let go, to heal." But Olivia's expression was unreadable, a storm brewing beneath the surface. Without another word, she stood up and left, leaving him feeling both relieved and unsettled. He knew he'd made the right decision, but Olivia's intensity had left a lingering sense of dread. In the following weeks, Olivia's behavior grew erratic. She continued to show up at his apartment unannounced, sometimes leaving messages on his doorstep, other times calling him late at night, her voice filled with barely contained hysteria. Ethan, exhausted and at his wit's end, finally decided to change his locks and block her number, hoping to put an end to her relentless pursuit. But Olivia was not easily deterred. She turned to other means, creating fake social media accounts to message him, sending him emails filled with veiled threats and desperate pleas. She would stand outside his building, watching, waiting, her presence a shadow that haunted him day and night. Her obsession had reached a fever pitch, and Ethan felt as if he were living under siege, constantly on guard, fearing her next move. His health began to suffer. He barely slept, haunted by Olivia's persistence and the fear that she would never let him go. His colleagues noticed his decline, his once vibrant spirit dulled by the weight of her control. Jessica, his only remaining friend, tried to help him, but Ethan had withdrawn, too afraid to draw her into the chaos that had overtaken his life. And Olivia, feeling her grip slipping, became even more desperate. She resorted to extreme measures, breaking into his apartment one night while he was at work. She searched through his things, poring over every detail of his life, looking for anything that would tether him to her. She found an old photograph of him with Jessica and tore it to pieces, her mind consumed by jealousy and rage. When Ethan returned home to find his belongings ransacked, he knew he had reached the breaking point. He called the police, filing a restraining order against Olivia, hoping it would finally end her obsession. But Olivia's love had transformed into something darker, something beyond reason. She saw the restraining order not as a warning, but as a final betrayal, a sign that Ethan had chosen his own life over their love. In her mind, there was only one way to regain control, to reclaim the life she had built around him. And as the winter nights grew colder, Olivia's thoughts turned to vengeance, her love for Ethan twisted into a deadly determination. Descent into darkness. With the restraining order in place, Ethan hoped he could finally reclaim his life. The weight that had burdened him for months began to lift, and he found himself breathing easier, slowly returning to the routines and relationships that had once defined him. Yet, despite his relief, a gnawing unease remained. Olivia had not reached out since the order, which, in a strange way, unsettled him even more. For Olivia, the restraining order was a betrayal beyond forgiveness. The woman who had once built her world around Ethan, who had sacrificed friendships, hobbies, and her own sense of self for his love, now found herself shut out completely. She became an outsider in a life she felt entitled to, a spectator who could no longer influence or control. Her identity, once so intertwined with Ethan's, felt stripped away, leaving her with an emptiness she couldn't bear. In the days following the order, Olivia fell into a profound silence. Her apartment, usually meticulously organized, became cluttered and chaotic as she let herself drift into despair. She spent hours replaying old memories, scrutinizing every conversation, every shared laugh, every touch, searching for where things had gone wrong. She refused to believe that Ethan had simply moved on. In her mind, someone had pushed him to this decision, filling him with lies and doubts about her. And that someone, she was convinced, was Jessica. Jessica had become the focal point of Olivia's hatred, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. She saw Jessica not as an innocent friend, but as a cunning intruder, a thief who had quietly, insidiously, stolen Ethan's loyalty and love. The more she dwelled on it, the more her anger grew, mutating into a dark obsession. If she couldn't have Ethan, then Jessica had no right to either. Fueled by this twisted logic, Olivia began watching Jessica obsessively, finding small ways to invade her life. She created fake social media accounts to monitor Jessica's posts, studied her routines, and even followed her from a distance, learning her daily schedule. The bitterness in Olivia's heart gave her a cold sense of purpose, and with each day, her resolve to expose Jessica grew stronger. One late afternoon, Olivia parked a few blocks away from the high school and waited, concealed in her car, watching the entrance. She saw students and staff trickle out, laughing, chatting, living the normal lives she once shared with Ethan. Finally, Jessica appeared, her bright smile illuminating her face as she waved goodbye to a colleague. To Olivia, that smile was a provocation, a reminder of the life she had lost. As Jessica walked to her car, Olivia's eyes followed her every move, her mind consumed with resentment. She imagined confronting Jessica, exposing her as the fraud she believed her to be. But Olivia knew she had to be patient. She couldn't risk a public scene. Instead, she spent her evenings devising a plan, piecing together small, calculated ways to undermine Jessica's life, to make her feel as isolated and vulnerable as Olivia now felt. Her first move was subtle yet invasive. Olivia hacked into Jessica's email and social media accounts, reading through her messages and learning about her personal life. The details were mundane, but to Olivia, they were treasures, fragments of Jessica's existence that she could now manipulate. She crafted anonymous messages, planting seeds of doubt and fear in Jessica's mind. She sent fake job rejections, bogus friendship requests, and unsettling emails, hoping to create cracks in Jessica's world. At first, Jessica shrugged off these incidents, dismissing them as minor annoyances. But as they became more frequent, she began to feel a constant, gnawing sense of unease. She confided in Ethan, who listened patiently, but both chalked it up to random bad luck. Neither of them suspected Olivia's involvement, nor the extent of her growing hatred. As winter deepened, Ethan finally felt the first taste of peace. He reconnected with his family, rekindled old friendships, and resumed his hobbies. His smile returned, albeit faintly, and he even joined his friends for their annual holiday get-together. He spoke openly about Olivia for the first time, sharing bits and pieces of the turmoil he had endured. His friends listened with sympathy, encouraging him to leave the past behind and focus on his future. But while Ethan moved forward, Olivia's grip on reality continued to erode. Her entire existence was consumed by thoughts of Ethan and Jessica. She refused to believe that Ethan's love for her had simply disappeared. To her, the blame lay solely on Jessica, and Olivia saw herself as the righteous figure, the wronged lover defending her rightful place. She convinced herself that if she could only get rid of Jessica, Ethan would come back to her, realizing that he had been manipulated all along. In mid-January, Olivia's obsession reached a breaking point. She hadn't seen Ethan in months, and the longing to reclaim him, combined with her hatred for Jessica, ignited a resolve that sent her down an irreversible path. She crafted a plan to confront Jessica directly, believing that a face-to-face encounter would reveal the truth she had fabricated in her mind. On a cold, gray Friday evening, Olivia drove to Jessica's apartment complex. She parked at a distance, shrouded in the shadows, waiting for her target. The air was thick with anticipation, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Hours passed, but her resolve didn't waver. Finally, Jessica's car pulled into the parking lot, and Olivia watched as she got out, fumbling with her keys as she approached her apartment. Taking a deep breath, Olivia stepped out of her car, her heart pounding with a strange combination of fear and exhilaration. She followed Jessica, her footsteps light and silent. Jessica's back was to her, and she was unaware of Olivia's presence as she unlocked her door and stepped inside. Before Jessica could react, Olivia slipped in behind her, closing the door quietly. Jessica turned around, startled, her eyes widening as she recognized Olivia. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and alarm. Olivia's face twisted into a forced smile, her eyes glinting with an intensity that sent a chill down Jessica's spine. "I just wanted to talk," Olivia replied, her tone unnervingly calm. Jessica took a step back, sensing the danger. "Olivia, you shouldn't be here. I don't think this is a good idea." But Olivia's smile only grew colder. "Why? Are you afraid? Do you think I'm some crazy ex-girlfriend?" She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "I just want answers, Jessica. I want to know why you thought it was okay to interfere in my relationship." Jessica's face paled, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone. "Olivia, I didn't interfere in anything. Ethan and I are just friends. You're the one who pushed him away." The words hit Olivia like a physical blow, and her mask of calm shattered. Her face contorted with rage, and she took a step toward Jessica, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have no idea what we had. You have no idea how much I sacrificed for him. And you just walked in, pretending to be his friend, poisoning him against me." Jessica's heart raced, her instinct for self-preservation kicking in. She glanced toward the door, calculating her chances of escape. "Olivia, you need help. This isn't normal. You're hurting yourself, and Ethan, by clinging to something that's over." But Olivia's rage only intensified, her breathing heavy, her fists clenched. "Don't you dare tell me what's normal," she spat. "You're the one who ruined everything. You stole him from me, and now you're telling me to just let go." Jessica knew she had to defuse the situation. "Olivia, listen to me. You're not thinking clearly. Ethan deserves to be happy, and you deserve to find peace too. But this isn't the way." For a brief moment, Olivia faltered, her gaze shifting as if wrestling with her own demons. But the anger quickly resurfaced, eclipsing any sense of reason. She lunged toward Jessica, her desperation overpowering her restraint. Jessica managed to dodge her, stumbling backward, but Olivia was relentless, her voice filled with a primal fury. "I loved him," Olivia screamed. "I gave him everything, and you ruined it." Jessica struggled, backing away as Olivia advanced, her words a torrent of bitterness and blame. In the scuffle, Jessica managed to reach her phone and dial 911, her voice trembling as she whispered for help. But Olivia didn't notice. She was too consumed by her own rage, her reality unraveling before her. By the time the police arrived, Olivia was in a state of manic fury, her mind lost in the delusion she had created. Jessica, shaken but unharmed, watched as the officers restrained Olivia, their voices calm yet firm as they led her out. Olivia's face was a mix of anger and despair, her final words directed at Jessica. "He was mine," she whispered, her voice filled with a haunting, empty finality. In the following days, Olivia's fate was sealed. She was charged with stalking, harassment, and breaking and entering, her obsessive behavior laid bare for all to see. The restraining order became permanent, and her career, once so promising, crumbled under the weight of scandal and public shame. Ethan, meanwhile, struggled to move forward, haunted by the memories of what Olivia had put him through. The experience left scars that would take years to heal, but with time he began reclaiming life. The aftermath of Olivia's arrest left Ethan and Jessica in a state of shock. The ordeal had taken an immense toll on both of them, and the days that followed were filled with a surreal numbness as they tried to process what had happened. Ethan, in particular, was haunted by a mixture of relief and guilt, emotions that swirled together in a confusing fog. He had loved Olivia once, or at least he thought he had, but the depths of her obsession had shattered any remnants of that affection. Now he found himself grappling with the damage she had left behind. Jessica, although physically unharmed, bore her own scars. She hadn't anticipated the extent of Olivia's fixation, and the encounter had shaken her to her core. The constant surveillance, the emails, and finally, Olivia's unhinged confrontation. It was a trauma she couldn't shake easily. In the weeks that followed, she tried to return to normalcy, throwing herself into work and leaning on friends for support, but her thoughts often drifted back to that chilling night when Olivia had cornered her. As Olivia awaited her trial, Ethan and Jessica sought solace in each other. Their shared experience became a bond, a lifeline that helped them navigate the waves of fear and anxiety that Olivia had left behind. They began to meet more frequently, not out of necessity, but out of a shared understanding. Jessica's calm presence offered Ethan comfort, and Ethan's strength reassured Jessica, reminding her that despite the trauma, she was not alone. But moving forward wasn't easy. Olivia's actions had left a lingering shadow over Ethan's life, and it was clear that his emotional wounds ran deep. He struggled with guilt, wondering if he had somehow contributed to her obsession. Had he ignored the warning signs for too long? Had he been too accommodating, too forgiving? These questions plagued him, robbing him of sleep and peace. In an attempt to heal, Ethan sought the guidance of a therapist. Through counseling, he began to untangle the complex emotions he had buried, facing the reality of his own vulnerability and the impact Olivia's behavior had on his self-worth. His therapist helped him see that Olivia's obsession wasn't his fault, that her fixation had stemmed from a fractured sense of self that he couldn't have fixed or controlled. Slowly, he began to let go of the guilt, replacing it with compassion for himself, a realization that he, too, deserved understanding and healing. The trial date arrived in early spring, and the weight of the case drew national attention. The details of Olivia's obsession, the surveillance, the manipulation, and her final confrontation with Jessica were laid bare in court. Witnesses testified, sharing accounts of Olivia's increasingly erratic behavior, and experts analyzed her actions, revealing the dangerous extent of her obsession. Olivia, who had been held in a psychiatric facility since her arrest, appeared distant, almost unrecognizable. Her once sharp gaze was clouded, her expression vacant, as if she were a shadow of the person she used to be. Jessica was called to testify, an experience that dredged up painful memories. She recounted the night Olivia had broken into her apartment, detailing the fear she had felt and the desperation in Olivia's eyes. The judge listened carefully, and the courtroom remained silent as Jessica described the moment she realized just how far Olivia was willing to go. Ethan watched from the gallery, his heart heavy as he listened to Jessica's testimony. He wished he could protect her from reliving that night, but he knew that her courage in facing Olivia was part of her own journey toward healing. Finally, Ethan took the stand, his voice steady but laced with emotion as he described his relationship with Olivia. He recounted the initial charm, the way she had slowly infiltrated his life, her possessive behavior that had, at first, seemed like love but had morphed into something toxic. As he spoke, he realized how much he had endured, how much he had lost to her control. But in facing the truth publicly, he felt a weight lift, as though he were reclaiming his voice, his life, piece by piece. The defense attempted to paint Olivia as a victim of her own mental health struggles, suggesting that her actions were driven by untreated psychological issues, while Ethan acknowledged that Olivia's behavior likely stemmed from deep-seated issues. He couldn't ignore the impact her choices had on his life, nor the suffering she had caused. The judge, in his final ruling, recognized Olivia's need for intensive psychiatric treatment, but also imposed strict limitations, ensuring that she could never contact Ethan or Jessica again. With the trial concluded, Ethan and Jessica felt a sense of closure, though the scars of their experience remained. They each embarked on a journey to rebuild, to reclaim the parts of themselves they had lost to Olivia's influence. Jessica pursued her work with renewed focus, finding purpose in teaching and mentoring students, using her own resilience as a quiet source of strength. Ethan, too, found solace in his teaching, returning to the classroom with a deeper understanding of empathy, patience, and the value of healthy boundaries. Over time, Ethan and Jessica's friendship deepened. What had started as a mutual support system evolved into a connection that neither of them had expected. They understood each other in ways that went beyond words, bonded by the shared trauma, but also by a newfound appreciation for life's quieter, more genuine moments. They began to spend weekends hiking, exploring the natural beauty around Ashland, rediscovering the joy of simply being in each other's company. On a warm summer evening after a long day's hike, they sat by a lake, watching the sunset cast brilliant colors over the water. Jessica turned to Ethan, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what could have been different?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded, contemplating her question. "Sometimes, I wonder if I could have seen the signs sooner, if I could have saved us all from what happened." Jessica placed a reassuring hand on his. "You did the best you could, Ethan. We both did. Some people are broken in ways that love alone can't fix." He smiled at her, grateful for her understanding. "I know. I guess I've just had to learn that it's okay to put myself first sometimes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fading light. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a true sense of peace. He had been through a nightmare, but he had come out on the other side, changed yet stronger. And with Jessica by his side, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. As the months turned into years, Ethan and Jessica continued to support each other, their friendship growing into something steady and profound. They never defined their relationship with labels, choosing instead to let it evolve naturally, without pressure or expectation. What they shared was built on mutual respect and understanding, a quiet yet powerful bond that anchored them both. In the years that followed, Ethan found himself reflecting on his experience with Olivia, recognizing that while it had been a painful chapter, it had also taught him valuable lessons. He had learned to listen to his instincts, to set boundaries, and most importantly, to value himself and his own happiness. He no longer carried the guilt or the fear that had once haunted him. Instead, he felt a deep gratitude for the second chance he had been given, a chance to live a life unburdened by control and manipulation. For Jessica, the experience had also left a lasting impact. She had faced her fears, stood up to Olivia's intimidation, and emerged stronger for it. She became an advocate for mental health awareness in her community, using her experience to educate others on the dangers of obsessive and controlling behavior. Her journey had taught her resilience, and she found a sense of fulfillment in helping others navigate their own challenges. Olivia, meanwhile, remained in treatment, her mental health closely monitored by professionals. She faded into the background, her story a cautionary tale whispered among those who knew of her descent. Her obsession had been her undoing, and though she never returned to Ashland, her legacy lingered as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked fixation. As for Ethan and Jessica, their lives continued, filled with the richness of genuine connections and a renewed appreciation for the freedom to live without fear. They had both been scared, yet those scars became symbols of resilience, reminders of a journey that had tested their limits but had ultimately brought them to a place of peace. And as they walked forward, side by side, they knew that no matter what challenges the future held, they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable.